Hello, this is going to be a demo to recap some of the things we learned last year about making a hybrid composite drawing to achieve this assignment and for some of the future assignments we'll be doing. As always, if you guys have questions about any of this technical stuff, please feel free to come to office hours. Feel free to send me your files. I can help you out. We're here to make it easier for you guys, but we won't be able to show you like everything step by step. But I'm going to cover some of the things here to kind of go over some of the things we did in class. Okay, so starting off in Rhino, I gave you a couple of Grasshopper definitions, and I think these are really helpful to make your life a little bit easier. The way that you can use Grasshopper in Rhino is just type in Grasshopper, and it will open up this window. This little window is your Grasshopper editor. And you can just drag and drop your .gh file, or you can go File, Open, and you can open that the files that I put in the template. And there's two of them there. One box is from lines definition, and the other one Obliquify. So I'll kind of walk through both right now to kind of help you out a little bit. Okay, let's open up our 3D view. And I'm going to just start with like a little line here. I'm going to make it like a 10-foot long line. Okay, so here's just a simple line. And what I can do is I can set that geometry from Rhino, from my Rhino window here, into my Grasshopper definition. Grasshopper can seem really complicated, but generally it kind of reads like a book from left to right. And there's certain components, like these geometry components, where we can reference geometry from Rhino and make it live in our Grasshopper definition. So here, for example, I'm just going to take a single line. I'm going to right-click on my geometry little component here, and I'm going to set one geometry. So what that does is it sets that line into Grasshopper. And what I can do then is plug that into this little definition I have set up. And you can kind of see most components in Grasshopper have at least one. Some have multiple inputs and multiple outputs. And you can see what it's asking for either by hovering over each input, or you can, on the top under display, you can say draw full names, and it will show the full names versus just the first letter. You can also change, like, so it doesn't draw icons, and it will tell you words. We should have to leave it there. Okay. And so essentially what this is doing is it's taking a rectangle of a certain length and width, right? And it is applying it to this line. And essentially it's applying that rectangle to the two ends of the line, the beginning, the start and the end. And it's orienting, that's what this component does, is orient, so it moves basically that rectangle to, you can see these little rectangles, these are the planes or perpendicular frames, perpendicular plane frames that these rectangles are oriented to. And then those two rectangles are basically just lofted together to create this 3D shape. Okay, and this is a component that caps it, so it creates like a little cap on the end here. So this can get kind of interesting if we were to say copy this line, rotate it on me. All right, copy this line. Maybe I connect the line with a couple other points here. Make a different color so you can see. And when I'm drawing, I have my snaps on, so make sure you got your O snaps turned on. That way my lines can snap directly to, in this case, the end of points. Usually I keep my ortho turned on here at the bottom. This is your O snap button. Here's your gumball toggle. These are all good to know. I'm using Rhino 8 here, but Rhino 7 looks pretty much the same. Okay, so now I can select all 4 of these lines, multiple lines, and I can right click and say set multiple geometry. And that will set multiple geometry. And you can see some of them are a little weird. I've got some, these ones aren't orienting the right way. And that's not too hard. There's other ways we can fix this, but I think for you guys, so we don't keep it simple, what I would do is just copy and paste, like select all of this chunk of the Grasshopper definition, do Control C, Control V, copy, paste, and then we can say maybe these top 2 lines. I'm going to hide all these frames. And all I'm doing here is I'm clicking my middle mouse button to bring up this little wheel, and there's a little toggle on and off. So this is the preview toggle. This one will actually turn off and on, or enable or disable these. Okay, so I want the middle 2 to be on this top definition, set multiple geometry, and I want the side to be this one. And here, if I want to rotate, say, the X and the Y, I can just flip the little sliders that are going into the X and Y. And now these will overlap. Okay? So we can see how this can start to get kind of fun. We can imagine copying or arraying a lot of the same commands we used last year. I could say, let's say all of these ones are going to be set as the top, and all of these side ones are going to be the bottom. And so you can see I can start adding, I can just keep adding and adding to this system. Like maybe there's some long lines that go across, or a V shape. And again, this is only going to work with single lines. There's other ways to do this if you can use polylines. Yes, it can be a little bit sloppy, but I'll show you how to simplify it in a second here. So, let's say I have those. Let's set these ones and another one. It's a bit thick. Right, so I've got like 3 different geometry here, and there's a cool trick. You can use Grasshopper to do some Boolean unions, which will make your life a little bit easier. This component is just called a merge component, so I can merge the data from all of these 3 outputs. And if I do Control A and then disable, and then I go back to my result and enable, I can see all that comes out. And in Rhino, I can Boolean union this together, but Grasshopper has a nice, I believe here, under intersections, a solid union. And I can double click and type panel, and this gives me this little panel that tells me about the data that's coming out of here. And here you can see it's kind of a complicated data tree. If I scroll down, to simplify things, you can flatten this. This deals with the realm of list management, data management. Not going to go into that right now, but just know if you ever need to simplify things, right click and flatten. And I'm going to put these all into the union. And then I'm going to put the result to here. And we should see there's a single B-rep. So rather than having a bunch of individual ones, I have a single object. Which now if I was to right click and bake it, it will bake it from Grasshopper, this kind of gooey flexible system. It'll ossify it into Rhino. So now I can click on the actual poly surface in Rhino. And if I look at it, if I look close here, if I click on it, you can see that there is where these beams kind of intersect with each other, they've been Boolean union together. So that's going to clean up your model, it's going to clean up your drawing. Not 100% necessary, but a nice thing to do. Okay, so I hope that this box from lines definition will intrigue you at the possibilities of Grasshopper a little bit. Being able to, the orient command is super powerful, ways to move geometry from one place to another. In this case, how to turn a bunch of lines into something in 3D. Okay. So I'm going to, let's take a look at this model I started to create. And essentially, this is 2 different structural grids. The red, let's see. The red here is just a 10-foot bay. Move this off to the side. With a kind of a 9-inch square diameter. Maybe I made a little bit rectangular diameter. To kind of the bay windows, like really simple. That's going to be the trace paper layer. And extrude it a little bit to give it a bit of thickness, or I think I did offset on there. And then in blue here, and you can sort of see these are cut off. These are a series of Varengel trusses, or kind of full floor or multi-height floor trusses. And I kind of imagine that these were stacked into the building. And then I just threw a spiral stair in there. I know you guys, I told you not to do stairs, but it's very easy to make a helix. Do the helix command and offset the helix and then loft it together. To get yourself a surface here. Just wanted something to vertically connect here. But you guys do not have to have circulation. But the big idea here is I have a bounding box. So there's, it's a little bit off here. Let me move it back. So this bounding box, shifted things around a little bit. So this is a 50 by 50 foot cube, and you can sort of see, especially in plan here, how the red grid that I had overlaps, and then these big boxes were also overlapping the edge of the grid, and I trimmed them. I used the trim command or the split command to get rid of everything that was not inside the box. Kind of trimmed it out there, right? This allows you to get these lines that you can see intersecting the box, and these can eventually be rendered as poché to show that this is like a section or a cut of what might be a larger chunk. You can imagine this thing like extending off into the distance. This is one thing that I would think will help a lot of your objects look maybe a little bit more dynamic and a little bit less kind of centered within the 50-foot square you have there. So basically I have the red is a thin system that is pretty basic. The blue is a thicker structural system that is more like these big box trusses that separate these floor plates. And the floor plates I have as green. And I've taken these low poly people and I've copied them around as well. Okay, I'm gonna jump ahead here. And so what I've done is explode some parts of it. So I've copied, say, the windows and moved them out. I've copied just the frames of this larger truss system, and I've moved it out. I've copied the floor plates and moved them off to the side. For the exploded axon, you can have most of it or even all of it like intact, and then we can pull some pieces off, or you could literally pull off like this whole wall here on the side. Like maybe I delete that. So it actually is getting exploded off to the side. Up to you. It's going to depend on how dense your model is, or what kind of vibe you're going with your final drawing. Experiment. Okay. So I've got all this geometry, and basically what I'm doing is I'm selecting all of it, and then I'm opening up my other Grasshopper definition, Obliquify. And what Obliquify is doing is it's shearing the drawing. So we kind of covered this last year. There's some differences between the different types of parallel projections. There's a difference between an axonometric, an isometric, and there's many different versions of isometrics. One thing that we have been using, and the template that's in the, or the named view that's in the template file, isometric, is using this kind of preset. So under set view, isometric, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, these are not quite an axon, and they're it's not exactly an ISO, but they're pretty close. They basically use Rhino's parallel view mode. You guys can just use that. If you wish, you can just use one of these views and call it good, and not make it an oblique, and not use this Grasshopper definition that I'm going to show you. That's fine, but I think it's nice to know that you can control the projection, and you can control the angle with how you make a drawing. And in the past, like before Grasshopper, there's a series of commands, and you guys can Google it, look it up, where you shear the model over at a specific angle in 2 directions, and it will kind of approximate what an oblique might look like. Some good people on the internet made this or version of this definition, which allows us to shear a bunch of geometry, and then in the top viewport, so under set view top, I will see the results of that view, and that's what I'm seeing in yellow here. So again, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to go up to geometry to Obliquify. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to set multiple geometry. And so what it's doing, and we can see in blue here, I'm going to delete this one. So this is what you guys have. In blue here, we can see the results of the shear. And what it's doing is it's taking a base point. So this is like some point on the ground, and you can move this slider to test different base points. But essentially, this guy shears in the X direction. So if I move this slider, it'll toggle back and forth in the X direction. And this one will toggle it back and forth in the Y direction. And it's just based upon length. So this would mean you'd be kind of eyeballing it. And if one of these is 0, it will just shear it straight in the X direction. This would be what we call like an elevation oblique, where you're only seeing like one elevation of it. But I want to show you guys, and you can add this yourself. There's another shear component. So if I double click in the Grasshopper window and type shear angle, click this, I can use the same geometry, so the same input is this one, the base. This is the base plane, which is this guy from here, and then angle in the X and angle in the Y, and it's asking in radians. Radians can be a bit confusing. So if I type in radians, I can get this little component which converts degrees to radians, which is really nice. So that way I can make a slider, so I can double click and say 0 is less than 360. And let's make it 45 degrees. I want a 45-degree axon. So I plug that into the X and plug that into the Y. And we're not seeing it update yet. There it is in red. So I can swap out this guy on the back end. This is just a preview node. This is the blue color I'm seeing. So I can click this into here and we'll be able to see the preview. Okay. So I can copy and paste, Control C, Control V, and plug another slider into the Y, and we can see we'll get different results if I have different numbers in the X and Y. And now this, again, this is based on angle rather than the one below, which is based on distance. There may be a reason you want to show a different side. If you tweak the angle numbers here, you can find the different sides that are offered by this perspective. You can also grab all of your geometry and rotate it. Like try rotating the whole geometry like 90 degrees. And you will see the result. We're kind of looking at another face, like a different side of it. So here I'm looking at the outside. Let's do 180. Now I'll be looking at the inside, or the side that's cut. Right. So hopefully this is interesting to you. When you're ready to go, when you're done, what you want to do is right click on, again, one of these components to the right. We'll choose bake. I would group everything together, and this gives you all of your geometry grouped together on a single layer. Okay. And I'm going to close Grasshopper. Okay, so we'll zoom out a little bit. This was turn off this ground. This is the last one I made, everything in blue here. And if I look at it in the 3D view, you can tell it's kind of squished. The proportions are kind of funny. It's been sheared. In this case, it's actually upside down. It's kind of funky. You might want to make sure that your numbers are such on your sliders that your geometry isn't totally upside down. It'll still work because what we're doing is we're looking at it from the top view. Okay, and so you can see this one over here. I already set up. Is sheared off to the side. It's got a funny angle, but if I look at it from the top view, it looks good. Okay, so two things that you're going to want to do after it's already been baked out of Rhino. One is to rotate it. Like you can have it at any orientation you want, but I think it makes more sense if you rotate it such that your verticals, so these like lines on the side, let's click two of these, are straight up and down. So I've got my ortho turned on, and so that way it's straight up and down. Okay. And then the next thing I would do is select everything, ungroup it. It's like a worm's eye perspective here. It's kind of funny. You might need to ungroup it twice. It might be grouped twice. And now we can start moving things back onto their layers because we want all the geometry to be on different layers. That way, when we render it, it can have different colors, right? So you can select it, you can right click on your layer name, we can say change object layer, or we could select it, and then in the properties window up here, we can choose layer, and we can change to a different layer, surface. And remember, I'm just using white or like a trace paper white, like a translucent white for surfaces and for the windows. And then all of the trusses here, I'm making that same wood material that's in the template. We don't want you guys to use different materials or spend any time looking on that. The goal is to make your rendering look sort of like your models, not necessarily like a super realistic building. Okay, but it's going to have this sort of vibe to it. Okay, so at this point, you're going to be kind of following a few things. I shared with you guys a PDF. Let's see if it pulls up here. This was made last year for students from 171. There is this is a repeat of what I showed you guys last year, but everything in bold. These are commands in Rhino, and it talks about a few steps that you're going to want to do before we run Make 2D. Okay. Specifically, there is this Intersect command, which is nice to run. This will, if you type Intersect, and I would have a new layer. You can see I have a layer here I called Intersect, and I made that live. It will draw lines, and you can kind of see it in blue here, like a line here at the intersection of this floor plate and this beam. And this is helpful for when you do Make 2D. If you have geometry that's on different layers that or geometry in different layers that overlaps, because it won't automatically draw a line there. But if you run the Intersect command, it will. Okay. Other things I do is make sure you have a named view for your orientation. So you can always like select your geometry. You can do ZSA. We can type named view, and we can save this. And this is helpful for when you're making your renderings, because you can have your rendering be the same viewport as your Make 2D, and it makes your alignment a little bit easier in Illustrator. If you don't, not the end of the world. Okay, so essentially we're going to make this hybrid drawing, we're doing two things. One is we're going to have a rendering of this, and the second is we're going to have a Make 2D. Okay, so let's maybe talk about the rendering first. You're going to, for those of you guys using Rhino Render, make sure your current render is set to Rhino Render. Under Render Properties, I'm going to the Render menu, Render Properties. We can change the settings, so the resolution and quality, how big is the render you're going to make. I would recommend setting this nice and low to do a test, not 100, maybe 1000 by 1000, with draft quality to do a test of your rendering. Rhino Render is pretty basic. Just leave the background as it is. Make sure you have your ground turned on, and then under lighting we have sun and skylight. So the sun refers to, if I click here, I've got position. If I have manual control on, position, so rotation and kind of elevation height. Feel free to mess with these. I think you should be aware of where your lights are. It changes how the rendering goes. And then the skylight, we have kind of ambient light or indirect light. You don't have much control over anything else besides that. You can turn the skylight down. You can, I think, in the sun menu, or let's type lights. If I type lights, I can turn the intensity of the sun down. So there's no camera settings within Rhino Render, but we can turn the intensity of these two numbers down. if your render is coming out a bit washed out and a bit too bright, okay? There is a difference between just having it in rendered mode here, rendered preview mode, and actually running a render. So it's a render window render. If you want it to look really good, go render, okay? It's gonna process the light rays more accurately as they bounce around inside the scene. Okay, so after you get it tested, then you can increase the size of your rendering. So maybe go at least 2400 by 2400, and maybe even increase the quality to good. You don't need final, it's gonna be way too overkill. Even up to from 50 to 500 samples, it's a big increase in time. So you may wanna let it run for a little bit overnight, okay? There's also Enscape, which is a plugin, real-time renderer. I showed you guys Twinmotion last year. Let's not do Twinmotion for this because we can't match the point of view. Twinmotion has a different camera setting system, so I can't have this like specific point of view, even though it's just the top view. The other thing you can play with, and maybe I do a separate tutorial on this, is V-Ray. This has long been an industry standard for making nice renderings. V-Ray, you guys can get a good deal as students, and it's a nice thing to learn. It has a different asset editor that gets pulled up here, and it's got a couple of tricks. Let's just make this small and do a little test for you. 1200 by 1200. Just drop the quality down, and we can do an interactive render. And this is really nice while you're setting up your lights. And this other window, kind of similar to Rhino Render. And if we change things in the viewport, it should, like for example, my ground is turned off. Let's turn the ground on. It'll automatically update. It's going to be a little fuzzy here. I have OBS going and streaming. I'll just show you, see if this works. So if I was to move the light, so I'm just shifting it from the east to the west, it will update in real time here. Okay, it's going a little bit slow. I'm gonna keep moving here. There are lots of things that I love about V-Ray. Two things in particular that are really great is under environment. Under background here, I can click this little texture slot, and I can use some of V-Ray's preset skies. So it uses the Rhino sun, so my sun settings here, but the sky, there's a couple Preetham, Hosick, Overcast, preset skies you can use. These are really nice. There's V-Ray materials, there's V-Ray lights. Over here, so under the gear tab, if I click this little arrow to the right, it opens up the advanced settings. This is where I can change things, like so global illumination. This is how I can control specifically how the computer will render your image. Do some Googling, you can research this. It can get a little hairy, but it's nice. You can just move this quality slider. But advanced camera parameters, I like this a lot. So ISO, f-stop, and shutter speed. If you ever use like a DSLR camera, that will be familiar to you. So you can change these numbers, and the camera, the exposure of the camera will react pretty close to reality. So anyway, just want to show you real quick, like some examples. So here's like a Rhino Render. Preview's not working. So Rhino Render, pretty basic. You can see the shadows do get crisper than the render preview, but not a really great kind of bounce light. It's going to be pretty basic illumination after that. V-Ray Render is going to be a little bit crisper. Better bounce light, a little bit nicer transparencies, a little bit more defined color. And then Enscape I threw in here as well. Enscape is going to, in my opinion, look a little bit cartoony. I think there's ways that you can fix it. It kind of adds in what it looks like ambient occlusion-y kind of things, or almost like a cell shade look, which some people like a lot. But yeah, it's not quite as realistic as V-Ray on there. The nice thing about Enscape is that you can use the same named views. Okay. So you've got a rendering. The next step is to make 2D, and a few things to be aware of. I'm going to talk about this in here a little bit. But there's one thing you're going to want to do is I would make a new layer called MeshOutline. I would select all of my geometry that you want to see. I would type mesh outline. And I know this is not a mesh, but what this will do is it will create effectively a silhouette that wraps around all of your geometry, all the empty space. And then I would run make 2D while I have that mesh outline selected. If you accidentally deselect, you can always right-click on your mesh outline layer. You can say select objects. That will select those geometries, and then you can type make 2D. If I look at that mesh outline geometry, you can see how it's not 3D. It's kind of projected flat onto the construction plane from whatever direction you're looking. So that's why I would run make 2D separate for the mesh outline from the rest of the stuff. Okay. You can hide your mesh outline layer. You can turn it off whenever you're ready, or just keep it selected, and we can do make 2D with everything. When you do make 2D here, a few things to be aware of. One, keep maintain source layers turned on. I think in instructions I say tangent edges you can keep turned on, but I would maybe keep that off. Scene silhouette, leave that off. That's what the mesh outline does. Hidden lines, sure, turn them on. We can mess with the line weights in Illustrator to make them simpler. Keep your viewport rectangle on and maybe group them. Okay, so definitely maintain source layers and then hit OK. The computer is going to think for a little bit, and you're going to end up with two-dimensional geometry over near your origin. So I've moved it off to the side a little bit. I've already done it. Okay, so I've got two-dimensional geometry off to the side here. CSA to zoom in. Great. 2D geometry. So at this point, you could go in and clean up. Just be aware, like, in the future, in future drawings, or even this one, to really take control over your drawing at this point, you should maybe do some two-dimensional drafting to clean things. Specifically, if there's like holes in geometry, something was missing here, you can fix it up. If you scroll down your layers, you can see there's different layers here. So I can like turn off all of the hidden lines, so on and so forth. Okay. Never trust that Make 2D is just a magic button that will make everything work great. You often need to clean it up. But let's say that I'm ready to go. At this point, what I can do is select the geometry. I would want it to be near the origin, so near the 0, 0 axis of your Rhino drawing. If you don't have it there, it may show up somewhere weird in Illustrator, like off to the side, which I know can be confusing. So select all of the curves, go File, File, Export, selected. We can export it straight to Adobe Illustrator. Under the options, we can choose the scale. So we're doing 1/8 inch equals a foot, otherwise known as 8 feet equals 1 inch. And you don't need to mess with any of these settings here. Everything should be good. And then you'll hit OK, and it will export straight to AI. Okay, so at that point we have our, let's go back to the, at that point we have our mesh outline, we have our Make 2D, and we have a rendering. We have a rendered right here. You guys don't follow this is for the triptychs, but a rendering, so no lines, just a raster image of your model. Okay, and so now we're gonna open these things into Illustrator. You can open your AI file straight into Illustrator. I'm going to hide the rendering. And in this case, I registered the mesh outline. So if I hide all my other layers, we should see my mesh outline right there. And everything else is going to come in with these kind of crazy names. Make 2D, visible, curves, people, and all the hidden lines are all kind of separated as well. Let's turn on the hidden lines. Let's unlock them, and I'm going to show you guys how to kind of simplify things a little bit. So here is just my hidden lines turned on, which are the dashed lines. I'm going to select all of them. And I made a new layer. So in my layers window, again, my windows open here. The ones that you see on my screen are probably ones that you're going to want to have open. Definitely layers, definitely stroke, definitely transparency, color, and swatches as well. I'll get swatches going here in a second. Okay, and then so I made a new layer called Hidden, and then I'm gonna click on the little square to the right side of my Layers tab. There's like a little square here. I'm gonna click and I'm gonna drag up onto my hidden layer. It's a little cumbersome, but this is how you move things onto new layers in Illustrator. I'm going to close Rhino. See if this works. Oh, I have to unlock my hidden layer. That's why it wasn't working. Wish there was like a faster way here, like a properties. There is a properties window in Illustrator, but it doesn't necessarily work the same way as the Rhino ones, where you can change geometry by. There you go. Okay, so now all that gray stuff has been moved onto the orange hidden line. All these layers, these ones that did have information on it, now you can see there's no white arrow next to them here, and what that means is that they're empty. There's no information on these layers anymore. So I can go ahead and I can shift select these layers and I can delete, and that will get rid of them. This is nice to do. It'll simplify things as we go. Okay, and all I want to be doing now is changing the line weights. So making sure all of my, over here on the left side, I've got my fill and stroke here. You can toggle between what's your fill and what's your stroke. And I want my strokes to be black, not gray. And I want the stroke weight, sorry, I'll show my options here. So this is under my window, stroke, I have that thing open. The hidden lines, I want to be really thin, and then dashed lines, I can change this number, maybe 2. So it depends on what size you're doing, 2 and 2. Looking pretty good, nice and thin. Okay. One thing I didn't cover here, and I did before I turned this on, was changing the size of the artboard. Okay, so when you open your file straight from Rhino, the artboard is going to be a little bit small. You want it to be 24 by 24. Control R will turn on and off your rulers. I like to have them on, and then you can right click on the ruler and choose inches. That'll make your units inches. And then you can click your document setup. And if you don't see your document setup up here, I would do Window, Workspace, Essentials Classic. That will show the document setup here at the top. If I click that, I can click Edit Artboards. And then up at the top, I'll see my width and my height. And so I can type in 24 by 24. Okay, back to line weight. So I got my hidden ones figured out. I also have a bunch of other lines here. And these are separated by layer, right? My windows are purple, the people here are blue, and this can be kind of helpful. What I would do is, we'll do the colors last, but I could make everything different weights, different thicknesses. Really, all I want to do is make the people. So unlock. So if I click the little circle next to the layer name, that will select all of the geometry on that layer, the people. I'm going to make those really thin, let's say 0.25, just because there's lots of facets on those outlines. Oh no, this one got moved. See if I can reset it. happens. I was moving stuff around. All right, call it good. All right, so I could make all these things different thicknesses, but I'm gonna leave, let's lock the people layer, let's select everything else. For the sake of clarity, I'm gonna drop the thickness just a little bit to 0.75. And we don't need anything but black lines. So I'm gonna make the stroke black. People 2. Stroke black. Okay. Let us turn on mesh outline. Let's select the mesh outline. Let's make that one stroke 2. We'll keep it exaggerated, maybe 1.5, but 2 will exaggerate. That's a bit thick. Set the mesh outline. Let's make the weight 1.65. I don't know. You guys can mess with that. And there we go. There is kind of a cleaned up line drawing. Things I'm going to add are little lines that show that this is exploded off. But let's finish the composite. So this is a render. I did it in V-Ray, but you can do it in Rhino Render, same thing. Just a PNG that was saved. I would copy and paste it into my working file, my working AI file. I've already got it copied and pasted here. Let's lock everything. I like getting in the habit of locking everything that I'm not working on. And the rendering is obviously not going to perfectly be matched up with this, and you're going to have to kind of grab the top corner and holding the shift button get it registered. This can be sort of a tricky process. The way I recommend doing it is to kind of work in the top right corner or top or left corner, and then work for the bottom right corner and kind of go back and forth from corner to corner and pushing and pulling your image so that it aligns nicely with the line work. Okay. And that is a composite drawing, right? So I've got the rendering layer dragged to the bottom of my layers tab, and I've got the line work over the top. You could be done here, but I think you want to massage it a little bit. Specifically, I think you should reduce the transparency of your rendering a bit. So under having your transparency window open, and drop it down anywhere from 60 to 80, 75 something. Looks kind of nice. It just makes it fade away just a little bit, and can't be so overbearing. The other thing you can do is open your rendering in Photoshop, and adjust the tones or the contrast of your image in Photoshop as well. There, that's good. I'm gonna lock it. All right, other things, and let's hide it for now. Other thing that is nice to do, let's unlock, and you can always rename your layers too. 3D people. The intersect layer, all these, maybe I make those a different thickness, 0.5 maybe. Like everything we talked about last year, you can have hierarchies of line weights, different types of line weights in your images. But I want to select all of this geometry, not the mesh outline, just all that geometry. And I want to add some color or patterns. So I'm going to select those all. I'm going to hold the Shift button or the Alt button, which allows me to duplicate geometry. So I'll click and I'll drag. And then as I'm dragging, hold the Shift button, which will keep it dragged directly off to the side, directly to the left. Okay. And this guy, I now want to make into a LivePaint group. So under Object, LivePaint, Make. Okay, and you can see it collapses it onto a single layer. I've got a LivePaint layer set up here, so I'm just going to drag everything onto my LivePaint layer. So I'm working there. Okay, and at this point we can paint bucket into the shapes, and K is a shortcut. Otherwise, over here on the left side, there's the LivePaint bucket tool, and this allows us to say I have a color selected, I can paint bucket that color into my scene. Paint bucket color into my scene. Okay. This is super powerful because it does paint bucket kind of like in Photoshop, but it keeps everything a vector, meaning it'll be easy to change these colors later. And this working with vectors is generally going to be more lossless. You won't have as many issues with like JPEG compression and all that. Okay, one thing to be aware of is your swatches panel. Swatches is nice. If you click the hamburger menu, we can go to swatch library, and we can go to say color books, and there's going to be a whole bunch of different color books. Snap this in here, and these are nice if for whatever reason you want to use Pantone colors. Okay, it's my shortcut. Yellows, spiral. Okay. Inevitably, just kind of like here, there's going to be some gaps in your line work. No one's perfect. You always kind of mess this stuff up. A few ways to change this is I can get the direct selection tool, so the white arrow, which allows me to click on like individual points, and I can push and pull control points and handles to kind of add back curvature and close off zones. Or I can draw lines using the pen tool or the line tool. In this case, I'm just going to draw like a line across here, not being super careful. And this line, if I click on it and I hold shift and I click on the rest of my LivePaint group, and I go to my object menu, LivePaint menu, merge, this will merge that line into my LivePaint group, which then allows me to, with K, the shortcut, to paint bucket. Holding Alt and clicking will target a color, that yellow into there. So merge is nice to do. Okay. The other swatches that are good to be aware of, or other swatch libraries are good to be aware of under swatch library. Patterns, graphics, dots, lines, and textures. There's a bunch of these you can kind of experiment with. Dots, for example, if I was to paint bucket, onto there. It's pretty cool. Maybe swatch library, patterns, graphics, textures. You'll see these around people's drawings quite a bit. Something there. graphics, lines. And we can drop in some, maybe a bit heavy. Some lines across there. You can go nuts. What then you would want to do is, when I select these, I can see the handles on the corners are kind of white. And if I want to edit this, I'm done live painting, I can go to LivePaint, Object, LivePaint, Expand, and that will expand out of the LivePaint group, which then allows me to, under Fill and Stroke, make the strokes none, with a, meaning the little box with the red line through it. Because all I want is the color, the tones. I've already got the strokes over here. And I don't want to like double up the line work or kind of mess up my line work. I want to have the LivePaint group kind of floating in between the line work and the rendering. So if I move this over, there we go. And if I turn on the rendering, we can sort of see how these will overlap. Now again, solid colors without any transparency is going to be a bit intense, but I would definitely play with the, under the transparency menu, this little tab, which is your blending modes. Overlay is a nice blending mode to play with. Maybe blending mode plus a little bit of opacity drop. And we can see even here, the shadows will come through, so you get the rendering, the image below, being blended into the LivePaint color layer. So blend modes are super powerful. And now I can also say, use my direct selection, the white arrow. I can click, say these polka dots, I didn't like them. I can click on, say, just one of them with the direct selection window. I can go to select menu, same fill color, and that will select all of the same fill color. And let's say right click, transform, scale. And I want to scale not the objects, but just the patterns. So I can unclick objects and maybe half size, 50%. And that scales, they stay within their shape, but the pattern itself gets scaled. One thing people often ask is, how do I, say I want these dot patterns to be a color, how do I do that? So any swatch, you can drag and drop out of the swatch window, and then we can edit it. So I can, again, using the direct selection tool or A, I can select all of these little circles. The reason I'm doing this is there's like a frame in there also, but I just want the circles. And I don't know, make them pink. Okay, and then I can select this whole thing, go to my swatch window, and I can drag it right into the swatch window. Now I can, let's do the same thing. A is a shortcut. Click on this shape. I can go select, same, fill color, and then I want to drag and drop, or I can just click on my new pattern, and that'll make the pink dots take over. Okay, so feel free to, you can see this adds a lot of drama. You know, this one maybe I don't want, I want it to rotate a little bit, so transform, rotate, not the object but the pattern. And you should see the preview kind of pop up. I can rotate it to match the, sort of match the angle. Beautiful. In the LivePaint, you know, maybe this is where I'm adding in the poche too, so kind of the black. black lines that go around, or in a pinch, you can always, P is the pen tool. If you lock everything, we can start to There we go. P is the pen tool, and if I P into these guys, I can make it black. Bam, instant post shade. So you can either LivePaint or you can just add shapes and kind of add some black where it's getting cut, and that will help with the drama. Okay. What else was I going to show you? Oh, my hidden lines, turn those back on. There is a file with a bunch of scale figures, Adobe Illustrator file with a bunch of scale figures, just the silhouettes of people. Feel free to use those if you don't want to have the low poly mesh people in your scene. That's fine. If you don't want to use those, here's those silhouettes. The tricky part about if you have a silhouette, how do you make it look like it's an oblique? I think the best way is maybe transform shear, and that we can shear it vertically. It's kind of odd, but that will make it look sort of close. It's freezing up here. So a few things I'd like you guys to add, kind of as a narrative layer to this. One obviously is like lines that come off to show the explosions. We can just drag a line. You can draw these in Rhino if you want, and we can do them here in Illustrator. I want to have the line be black. I'm going to make sure it's a dashed line. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make the thickness like 0.5, and under arrowheads, I'm going to give it an arrowhead. And if the arrowheads are a bit small, maybe I float this away a little bit. I can always increase the percentage here. Let's make them like 200% so they're a little bit bigger. A little bit more precise here. And then as always, I can hold the Alt button and click and drag, and I can copy that a few times. All right, so you don't need to do every single corner for every piece of geometry, but like a few main corners to show that everything is being exploded. I'm not going to do it all because my computer is going a little bit slow here. So explosion lines. The second thing you're going to want to add is either annotations or speech bubbles. Okay, so annotations, this could be just a text box, and then using the pen tool, holding shift, and then doing another one. Maybe this one's not dashed. Maybe this also has an arrowhead. eventually you'll be doing this in AutoCAD all the time for drawings and stuff, but nice to have some indicators of the different components. A is a shortcut to that we can select individual anchors. All right, so you can start to notate your drawings. You can add pretty basic dimension strings. So just a line with 2 arrowheads. And again, you don't need to dimension everything, but you can maybe for a few of your structural bays, you can add some dimensions, showing that one of these bays is like 10 feet. Or we can make some kind of speech bubbles. Nice way to do that is under the rectangle tool. If you click and hold, there's rounded rectangle. And so we can click and drag, and that will make like a little rounded shape. Make it white with the background. And then to make the little arrow, or the part that extends to the person's mouth, P is the pen tool. And if you do 1, 2, 3, it makes like another shape. So I got 2 shapes here. You can leave it as is. Maybe it's kind of cool to show that. But if you want to join them together, there's another great tool called the Pathfinder. So under Window, Pathfinder, this basically operates like booleans. So these 2 shapes, if I click them, and under my Pathfinder, the first one, unite. If I click unite, this will unite these together into a single shape. Right, so this is where we can have our people start to maybe narrate some of the ideas like that you guys are thinking about in terms of how these worlds can start to come alive. And click A, and click on my little anchor point here. And maybe it's a little weird. V, which is the black tool. I'm just going to flip this. Right, so you can start to see how this starts to get much more beautiful than just the kind of pen mode or just a rendering that you might have. You can layer lots of information onto here. Please add your name. Please add a title. You can do it as like a separate card off the side. You know, maybe it's like a note card size, almost like a caption for a gallery. Or you can add it onto your board here. If you do that, keep the title rather small. Don't make like big, huge titles that kind of combat visually with your drawing. Let's make sure I covered most stuff. Yeah, and so when you're ready, when you're done, well, first off, I would be saving early and often. Save as like a .ai file, you know, maybe call it something different than the one you exported from Rhino. And then when you're ready to print it, you can save it as a PDF. And this will make a multi-page PDF based on whatever artboards you have. Each artboard will turn into a page. And you don't need to mess with any of these settings, just hit OK, and that will save us a nice PDF, which you can plot. Lowell has 24-inch wide paper that you guys can ask to use to plot on. Otherwise, just plot it on 36-inch, and then you can trim off the bottom part. You can also add on the 3 8-inch or almost 8-inch 8x8 images of your physical model as well onto the single plot if you wanted. You can even lay that out here in Illustrator. Okay, I'm sure there's plenty of questions. Get as much of this into your model as possible, into your drawing as possible, and then after the midterm we will also be using some of these same tools so you can keep practicing. All right, look forward to seeing the results.